This is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club, on New Zealand health stamps. Now, New Zealand health stamps were issued to raise funds for health camps. And health camps started in New Zealand in 1919. And it was an open-air health concept from 1909. And the theory was that if you were outside, this would help stop the spread of infectious diseases. And in 1909, what they were particularly concerned about was tuberculosis. The stamps themselves were issued between 1929 and 2016, and as I've said, they were in support of children's health camps. In the beginning, the plan for the health camps was to teach children sensible routines like brushing your teeth and eating a healthy, balanced diet, because there was concern about children who were malnourished. The government funding for these health camps began to fade in the 1990s. Dr. Elizabeth Gunn OBE, who lived between 1979 and 1963, was instrumental in starting the camps. And she was, I don't know the right adjective, a champion, a pioneer of children's health. She was an awesome person. She was born in Dunedin, where I lived for a couple of years, and she got her MD from the Edinburgh Medical School in 1903, and she served in World War I, and she was a passionate champion of children's health. She appeared on 2 New Zealand stamps, in 1969 on the 50th anniversary of the camps, and again in 1994 on the 75th anniversary of the camps. The first health stamp was issued in 1929, and it featured a nurse, and it was based on the photo of a real person, Nellie Burt, who was a nurse. And you can see the caption, which was help stamp out tuberculosis, and the date 1929. And the tuberculosis cross. 592,000 stamps were sold, raising just under 2,500 pounds, and $1,000 in 1927 would be 50,000 New Zealand dollars in 2020. So 2,500 pounds in today's money would be 125,000 New Zealand dollars. So that was a fair old good amount of money for 1929, 2,500 pounds. In 1930, the same image is used, but you'll see the caption changes. It's now Help Promote Health. We still have the tuberculosis cross. Fewer were sold, only 215,000, and just under 1,000 pounds. And one of the fun things about collecting New Zealand health stamps is most of them, not all of them, but most of them show the date. So you can see at the bottom in the middle there, by the cross, it shows 1930. 1931, the red and the blue boy. These are two very attractive stamps, but they were issued at the height of the Depression. There were all kinds of production problems. The stamps were not separated far enough for the perforations, so they had to cut up the plates and put in spacers. And because the postage rates had gone up, they issued 2 stamps. But as I said, height of the Depression in 1931, and very few were sold, and only just under 800 pounds was raised. So this is going in the wrong direction. 1932 is Hygeia, the goddess of health. Hygeia is the daughter of Asclepius, the god of medicine. She has 4 sisters: Panacea, Iaso, who's the goddess of recuperation, Akeso, who's the goddess of healing, and Aglalia, who's the goddess of beauty. Did a little better, sold 237,000 stamps, raised closer to 1,000 pounds. 1933, one of the many kind of clever designs they had on the early stamps. This is the Pathway to Health. To 260,000 stamps, 1,000 pounds raised. 1934 was the Crusade for Health, and we have a crusader with a banner saying health. Crusade for Health is down on the bottom there, 1934. Again, a little bit more money, just a bit more than 1,000 pounds, 279,000 stamps sold. 1935, and again, this is one of my favorite things about the early health stamps, is they have these clever designs. So this is the key to health, and through the keyhole we see a kid at the beach getting some exercise, out in the sun, out in the fresh air, doing healthy stuff. 1.2 million stamps are sold, raising 5,000 pounds. 1936, again a clever stamp, Safeguard Health. We've got a little girl inside a life-saving ring. Health and postage, 1936. 1.5 million stamps, almost 6,000 pounds raised. 1937, tramping, which Canadians would call hiking, but if you're a New Zealander and you're going out for a hike, you call it a tramp. And here we see someone presumably at the top of a mountain. He's got his hiking shorts on and his hiking boots on, and he's out in the fresh air again. Fewer stamps sold, just under 4,000 pounds raised. 1938, another cute stamp, children playing, two little kids playing outside. 1.2 million in stamps sold, 5,000 pounds raised. 1939, now we're at the beginning of the Second World War. This is another interesting series of stamps, 1939 through 1941. And it's a image of two boys playing. Apparently there were 3 separate photographs of 3 separate kids that were used to sort of compile this image of kids playing. What happened between the time the stamps were printed and issued, the rates had gone up. So if you look closely, you can see that the green stamp is for 0.5 pence postage and 1.5 pence for health, and the red stamp is 1 and 1. It was surcharged to 1 pence for postage and 2 pence for postage. Sold combined between the two under 1 million stamps and raised just over 3,000 pounds. So wartime is tough, not very many stamps are sold, and they decided to use exactly the same design, though re-engrave it, so it's 1 pence and 2 pence. Again, fewer sold, 2,000 pounds raised, but they're being careful. And you would have thought, I was sometimes confused, because you would have thought that the surcharge stamp appeared after this one, but it doesn't, because if you look closely, as I say, you will see that the surcharge stamp is for 0.5 pence and 1 pence. 1940, we didn't sell very many in 1940, so in 1941 we use exactly the same stamps, but this time they're overprinted, 1941. Still don't sell a lot. Again, what's that, 800,000 stamps and 2,500 pounds raised. 1942, another cute stamp, 2 kids on a swing. Gotta love the stamp. Does a little better, raises 5,000 pounds, almost 5,500 pounds. 1943, we finally find the stamp that's going to sell and raise money for health camps. Now, also 1943, we're starting to, I think, probably feel a little more optimistic about the end of the Second World War. Things have probably turned around a bit by now. But the 2 stamps depict Princesses Elizabeth and Margaret. Elizabeth on the right is 17 in the stamp, so I suppose you can argue she's still a kid. And we sell 6 million stamps and raise 20,000 pounds. Good work. So 1944, learning the lesson from 1943, we again have Elizabeth and Margaret on the stamps, and again sell 6 million stamps, and again raise 20,000 pounds for health camps. So I thought that was an interesting conjunction, the popularity of two young royals. And we'll see if you look at other New Zealand health stamps, young royals appear quite often. So that's enough stamps. There are 250 stamps, including souvenir sheets perhaps. So after that, sales stayed strong. They became popular and embedded into the New Zealand culture. Lots of them feature kids and kids sports. There's one features a health stamp. There are a whole series of stamps several years in a row where birds were appeared. There's a stamp with Princess Elizabeth before she became queen and her young child Charles. Charles and Anne as children appear. Andrew and Edward as children appear. And that continues on to the present day. When there are royal babies or royal children, they appear on the New Zealand health stamps. The other theme often is safety. We saw a couple before in this presentation about safety, and there were many more after. After that, normally 2 stamps a year, though sometimes there would be 3 or 4. Marketing, now as I said, I lived in New Zealand in Dunedin, and I can clearly remember as a little kid buying health stamps in school with, I guess, what I perceived as my own money, but my dad gave it to me. My dad was a stamp collector. And you could buy, they had miniature sheets, and for 2 shillings you got a miniature sheet of 6 stamps in 1963. 2 shillings, to put 2 shillings in context, a shilling was what my mom and dad gave me on Friday so I could have fish and chips for lunch rather than a packed lunch. And so you get a shilling's worth of fish and chips wrapped up in a piece of newspaper and go back and quite happily eat your fish and chips on the schoolyard. I guess there were a couple of lessons that they taught school children at the time. I don't know that they probably raised a whole bunch of money from school kids, and it was really their parents. But I guess the message you got to kids was health is important, and indeed there are some less fortunate to you, and it's an interesting early lesson in charity and community. Now, the New Zealand Herald of October the 15th, 2008 observed that health stamp revenue peaked at $158,000 in 1996, but as of 2007, we're down to 35,000 New Zealand dollars. Now, 1996, a 5-cent surcharge, that means they sold 3 million stamps, so that's not bad. But the New Zealand Herald at that time also observed that health camps were headed for closure. Now the stamps ended in 2016. The purpose of the health camps changed many times. It was no longer malnutrition and healthy routines. It changed several times, always in the context of kids that needed some help. The government funding since 2008 there has been reduced and or withdrawn, and the camps are having a difficult time finding funding to keep going. And as I said, the last year for the stamps was 2016. Now, if you're collecting stamps, you can collect New Zealand health stamps in a variety of ways. They can just be a part of your normal New Zealand collection. Every year you'd reserve a spot for the health stamps. There are only about 200 catalog numbers, and that includes souvenir sheets. So you could decide to collect them all. It's a finite set starting in 1929 and finishing in 2016. You could collect just the stamps. You could collect just the souvenir sheets. You could collect both. Lots of topical choices. There's 20 birds. There's a whole bunch of different topics on New Zealand health stamps. So there are lots of different choices for collecting stamps with New Zealand health stamps. Websites, if you're interested, New Zealand Post has a great website where they illustrate and give some description about every stamp. And there is the big long web address. And Wikipedia, of course, has a entry on health stamps, which is about the New Zealand health stamps. So, thanks for listening.